Hi, everyone. Thank you for taking the time to join us today at the Evolving E Masterclass co-hosted by GGV and Gladly. So just to give you a quick background, GGV is a venture capital firm based in the Bay Area, but we have offices in Menlo Park, San Francisco, New York, Beijing, Shanghai, and Singapore. We invest in a lot of different verticals across many startups one of the things that we'd like to do is to host Evolving E Masterclasses that are on a monthly or bi-monthly basis, catering to different topics. Today, we're going to have Gladly share with us customer service as the new marketing. And today we have two people from Gladly who are joining us, which is Joseph Antonelli, who is the CEO and co-founder of Gladly. And we also have Mike McCarran, the VP of Customer Success at Gladly, to kick things off. If you would like, we would do a Q&A at the end, and so you can definitely save and ask questions then as well. I'll let you guys take it from here.
Sounds great. Robin, first, this is Joseph. First, thank you for organizing and putting this together, and really appreciate you finding us to do that. Welcome to everyone this morning. Got about 30 some odd people on, and we're excited to have this conversation with everybody. To start with, we just want to, go next slide there. If you are in the Zoom, you can just click on that bottom. If you'd like to ask questions, if you want to just have them up on the screen here. So if you want us to ask some questions through, you can do that. We'll keep monitoring them. And if there's ones that make sense to do during the presentation, we'll do that. Otherwise, we'll come back to questions at the end. But we do want to make this interactive. So thanks for asking questions along the way. To start with, we wanted to ask a question of everyone as well. You should see that there's a way to sort of answer a poll. So I think we just published this poll question just to get a sense of folks on the webinar here. We'd love to know who currently owns revenue or revenue contribution as part of their customer service team. So if you own it, say you do. If it's not you, or if not you personally, with someone else in your organization, that'd be great. So if everyone could take a minute and answer those, that would be great.
Great. Seems we've got a pretty good mix of folks, about 40 to 50% on both the I do it myself or not me. And there's a very, very small percentage of folks that are coming in talking about how it's not them, not you personally, but it's expected of your organization. So this is just a great way for us to level set on who all is on the line with us today. What we're going to talk about today is really a lot about sort of how leveraging and using customer service as a new way to reach your customers, to drive revenue and to increase loyalty. So having that background and that insight is really quite helpful for us to know that.
So, the title of this session is Customer Service as the New Marketing. So we thought we'd start by grabbing the Oxford Dictionary definition of marketing, which is this idea that it's the action of promoting and selling products or services. And, we all spend quite a lot of money often on acquiring customers to sort of get that initial sale. And, the reality is that a lot of marketing looks and feels a lot like this. People are constantly bombarded with all kinds of messages, promotions, et cetera, to try to get people to do that initial transaction. And while that's super important, we really think that the image that we like to share is one like this, which is about driving engagement and loyalty. This idea that a lasting impression with a customer is made in a single moment. This idea of a child who loses their favorite, looks like a little bunny at the hotel, and then it's returned to them. That mom sitting in the back, you can guarantee that she's now created and has a sense of loyalty to these guys that is much, much greater than any individual marketing campaign. And we do, every year, we do a consumer and customer expectation, just to sort of share some stats to support this visually. We interviewed a couple thousand consumers across a whole bunch of age range demographics, and 3/4 of the people basically said that they make purchase decisions based on the quality of customer service over a host of other reasons. And again, about 3/4 of the folks return and do continued engagement with companies because of great customer service over marketing. When asked if it's one is more important than the other, 3/4 of the people said that great customer service is more important to do a repeat purchase than great marketing. And this idea that when you start to get to know somebody, 3/4 of the people will do repeat purchase and be loyal when they start to get much more personalized recommendations. And we share a bunch of these stats with you, and people often ask us, like, well, how do you measure the value of loyalty, and like how important is that? And I once answered the question, which is, this is the ultimate measure of loyalty, which is, will someone actually put their brand on their body? Will they tattoo it onto their body in this very permanent way? And Harley Davidson is obviously one of these unique brands where they have engendered so much loyalty with their customer base that people feel such an affinity that it is part of who they are. And this idea that loyalty is valuable and important, just comes through in tons and tons of metrics. And I think everyone's probably heard these as well. There's a whole bunch of studies that even small increases in retention, 5%, let's say, can increase bottom line profitability from anywhere from 25 to even 100%. And this idea of the success of selling to a customer you already have, it's much easier, where the success is higher at 60 to 70% than trying to convert a new customer, which is anywhere from a few percentage points to 20%. And also the sort of cost benefit, which is that it's 5 times more expensive to get a new customer to purchase than an existing customer. So there's just a ton of benefit to really thinking about investing in customer service as a revenue generator, which is not a very common thing that people do. A bunch of these stats are from this customer expectations report. This link here on the bottom, go.glad.ly/CER19. If you use that link, you can get right to the survey. You can read all the stuff. This is sort of a special private URL. You don't have to register for it, since everyone registered for the event. We just created a URL. You can just go download it yourselves. You can read the whole report. Lots of great stats in there to support sort of this idea. So just a little thing to take away. So let's jump in and sort of talk about this question of like, okay, great. Everyone understands the importance of loyalty and customer service in terms of driving revenue. So the question we often get asked is, okay, well, how do I transform the way I think about customer service to focus on driving revenue? What we want to do is we want to go through, I think, 5 or 6 themes of areas that we think are really important to drive this transformation. And with each of them, we're going to give a customer example. Some of them are Gladly customers, some of them are just brands that we admire, and talk about them and give examples of sort of how these themes have played out, if that makes sense. So let's start with this first idea. So the first idea that we believe is, if you look at most customer service organizations, and part of the reason we started Gladly is that most customer service is centered around this concept of a case or a ticket as the working unit. It's sort of the unit of value of a contact center. It's how many cases did we handle? How many tickets did we handle? What was resolution time? And we really think that to start to transform a contact center, you have to change the core measurement of what's important in the contact center. And we believe that it should really be by putting people at the center, your customers at the center of it, as opposed to cases and tickets. And the idea being that if you make it people-centered, and the idea is that you're focused 100% on how many customers you're helping in a given day, and everything centers around the customer, it's much more about driving relationships as opposed to thinking about work. And when we started the company, we were actually very curious about why people use cases and tickets in a contact center. And it turns out that it started in the early 1900s with hospitals. Hospitals were trying to figure out a way to keep track of patients, and they adopted this idea of a case file from the legal case system. So in the early 1900s, they came out with this idea of a patient case file, and eventually IBM built software for the insurance industry, which was case management software. And you fast forward 100 years later, and we're all using, or most folks are using, cases as this organizing principle for contact centers. And the issue is, this is the kinds of things that happen when you use cases as the center. This is actually an email that our head of marketing got, I think about, it was just Thursday, like just a couple of days ago, where she had an experience on a flight. It wasn't great. She responded to the company, and this was the response. And this is a major airline. I removed the names to protect the innocent. And there's so many problems with this as an approach to thinking about customer care, right? So this idea that, CC _ no reply, like, so they send you a note and you can't actually even reply to it. Like, that's like one of the worst things. But also, if you look at, the message itself, hey, we'd love to hear from you. We'll respond in 18 to 21 days. Not great. But more importantly, in the next sentence, it says, look, if you need to contact us about your recent email, please reference this case ID 15665-129-0339262. This idea that you take people and you turn them into a number is not an approach that we think is something that drives a lot of empathy or relationship building. And so we think that the right approach is to think about centering your contact center where the core operating principle is a person. And we want to share a little bit of a story of a customer called Native Shoes. If anyone has any kids on the phone, they probably know that, first of all, kids go through shoes like every 90 days. I have a couple of kids at home, and every 90 days they're buying new shoes because they just either destroy them or, more importantly, they're just growing out of them. And Native historically had been on a customer service platform which was very ticket-centric. And the problem was that it was just a very transactional approach to customer service for them. The primary operating principle was this individual transaction, like a return or something like that. And they didn't really have a view of, hey, who is this customer? What do we know about them? What's their history of transactions and purchases? What is the conversation history that may have happened yesterday, last week, a month ago? And doing it in a way which is independent of any of the ways that customers could communicate. So they had voice calls, emails, chat messages, etc. And it was all very siloed. But by moving to an approach that said, hey, we're going to organize and center around people, they were able to really now understand that one place where they have a history of who this customer is. And they have one conversation that seamlessly moves across all the different ways that their customers engage with them, with the goal that now they can really show you that they know you. So now when you engage with Native, it's just much more of a personal experience. There's ticket numbers, et cetera. And that's helping to drive more revenue and increase customer satisfaction.
So another thing to add to that too, this is Mike here, is around the notion of like those case-based systems that have those siloed communications where it's difficult for the team essentially to scale because there's so much inefficiency in terms of our customers moving from channel to channel. And as a small but growing fast company, how they think about scaling, but also maintaining that personalized level of service, it just simply wasn't possible for them to do that if they oriented the team, the metrics, and all of the work around cases. But as soon as they started to think about the customer at that center, everything from an efficiency standpoint falls into place because all the communications are there in one single place.
That's the other point. One of my favorite stats from the customer expectation survey, and we like to have a little fun with that survey, and we asked customers about a preference when they contact customer service, and more than half of the customers said they'd rather spend the day in wet socks than repeat themselves. And I think that that's one of the big value of having a people-centered approach versus cases. So one, let's make it about people. The second thing is really moving the way to think about the contact center from a traditional 100% reactive to figuring out how to make the contact center a proactive outreach channel. Now, this doesn't mean that 100% of your team and agents, et cetera, are going to be doing proactive outreach every single day. But the idea is that for those customers, which are high value customers, how do you change the relationship to one which is a proactive relationship, where there's regular outreach and it's more of an ongoing dialogue with that customer, as opposed to thinking about it as, hey, there's an issue and you just responding. Think about those places in the physical world where you build relationships with people in a retail outlet, for example, where they know you and they do outreach to you to help provide whatever you need. And I want to give an example of a brand that I actually interact with quite a bit. It's a company called Backcountry. They're a e-commerce provider based in Salt Lake City, very focused on outdoor activities. They have a series of sites they run, backcountry.com, which is just focused on all kinds of outdoor gear, camping, skiing, etc. They have a brand called Competitive Cyclist, which is very focused on both road and mountain biking. They have a motorcyclist site, etc. And when they started, they knew that in order to compete with Amazon, they were never going to get to that scale of selection and ease and simplicity of how people shop on Amazon. They said, hey, we have to figure out how they're going to build relationships and create that connection. So they have a traditional inbound customer support team, but what they've done that's just super interesting is they've created this team of what they call gearheads, which is a program that takes their most highly valued customers and they create a one-to-one relationship between a gearhead and a top customer. So for example, I have a gearhead, his name is Clayton. And my relationship with Backcountry is that roughly every 90 days, I'll get an email from Clayton saying, hey, summer's coming, do you need any new bike gear? We've got X, Y, and Z that I think you might be interested in. It's been 4 years since you bought a helmet, you might want to get a new one. And the program is just something that's much more about relationships and revenue generation. And that team is measured not on contacts, handle time, response time. They're measured on how much revenue does that, each gearhead has a couple thousand customers. How much revenue does each gearhead drive with that customer base, and how much of that continues to reach that customer base? It's really about investing in relationships. And there's a great story, you can actually read about it if you search Google for Backcountry and First Round Capital. You can see there's a story in an interview with Chris Perkey, who runs that team. There's all these great examples, literally, of gearheads getting invited to customers' weddings. And there's an example where a customer wanted a certain piece of outdoor gear and it was no longer in stock. And the person who's their gearhead actually had it and actually sent them theirs. It's really just changing that model to say, hey, who are our most loyal customers and how do we build relationships with them? Because that relationship then drives a ton of loyalty. And this is literally managed out of what you would normally think of as their contact center team. Again, they have a frontline team that does the one-off interactions, but it is, hey, let's figure out, let's deliver a level of service which is above and beyond.
I think another thing to add to that is that this was actually a sort of a trial experiment for the team at Backcountry. They actually originally started where they thought, let's try this out. Let's start with 10 gearheads and see what happens with this proactive outreach, this relationship-based sort of model in the contact center. And now they have north of several hundred gearheads on the team because of the success that they've had. So they didn't know if making that investment and having that team be ultra focused on those relationships was going to work. They didn't know if it was going to be cost effective to do that. But the results have proven out to be quite successful for them. And what I think is really interesting is that they use that pilot or that initial sort of like entree into that market. And now that's become the baseline model for them to engage those high value customers and those loyal customers. So those are all interesting.
We did get a question sort of how to get to the case study on this.
So
just search for Backcountry and First Round Capital, which is a seed stage venture fund, and it should be the first result. No problem.
Yep. Okay. So we talk a lot about the personalized service, that proactive outreach, and all. The other thing that we heard quite loudly in terms of our customer expectations survey was that customers want to be able to help themselves as well. So while you're doing all of this high touch customer service, as you're doing all of the proactive outreach with your customers, there is a model where you need to allow for customers to help themselves and to drive efficiency within the team so that the resources that you have on your team are focusing on those high touch, high value experiences. And so one great example, this is actually a customer that we have within the Gladly family, is Joanne. So Joanne's a retailer in the US that focuses on arts and crafts and all sorts of other stuff. Anybody who has kids who've ever done sort of an art fair project has probably been into one of these stores. But the idea is that we want to allow, and customers want to help themselves, especially for common questions like return policy or shipping information. They also may want to be able to go and find out information about how do I track my order or how do I get the status of my order. So providing ways for technology to enable the self-service allows for teams to both drive scale and drive convenience for their customers, but also leverage and focus their resources on engaging with customers in a meaningful way. So as much as you can do to deflect or to divert people to go to self-service to solve those easy sort of routine questions that come in, you want to go ahead and do that because that frees up your team to do more of the investment that they, if you will, in terms of customers. And being able to communicate and think about and anticipate the kinds of questions that people would ask. You know, many people have help sites, they have FAQs, but thinking about what are those specific questions that might be asked and how do you get those answers in front of customers quickly? That allows your team to really focus on the more difficult, complex, and sort of like relational-based sort of interactions that you have with customers.
The way we think about it is if you take the previous comment around becoming much more proactive, the idea is to figure out how you have the time to invest in the more deeper relationships, and how do you automate and drive a lot more process around the repeat things that people can do themselves. Use up a ton of capacity. And a lot of what we do when we work with folks is say, hey, look, what are those common things we get over and over and over again, and how do we figure out how to sort of either get those questions in advance out to people or make it really easy to find those questions themselves. So this is a really important part of that process.
Okay, great. Another area that we hear this all the time, we talk about this all the time with our customers, is around how do you empower the frontline customer service teams to really be able to handle the customer issues, handle the escalations that come in, and empower them to do the right thing by the customer. And I think there's one of our great examples that we have that we've been talking about in other webinars as well as on our website is JetBlue, which is a fantastic customer and a partner of ours. They actually have a program in place where they recognize over time that if crew members were in situations where they had to remedy a situation for a customer or to give flight credit or to give sort of like travel bank points to customers because of an issue on a flight or a less than ideal experience, what they found was that they were slowing down the process and they were slowing down the time to sort of get a customer a resolution because they had to sort of go up the chain and ask their manager for approval to sort of give customers sort of that credit or that voucher or whatever it was. And what they decided and realized was that 98% of the time when someone asked for a credit, the manager and the supervisor was approving that, and they were allowing that to be the case. And so what they did was they just essentially pushed that decision and moved that decision down to the frontline crew members. And they said, you have, within the boundaries of these sort of like rules, the ability to do what's right by the customer. So empowering those team members to do what's right by the customer, to use their best interest and use their best judgment to determine what's the right thing to do. It improved customer satisfaction because customers were able to get their answers really quickly. It lowered costs and it reduced the amount of time that it took because they didn't have to go up the chain to actually get approvals. And what they were also able to do is they could identify if customers who were calling, emailing, chatting, or text messaging in over all the channels that they were using within Gladly, they could track whether a customer was starting to abuse that service or abuse that particular scenario, which is if they always called in or they always emailed in with a similar or the same request and they started to abuse that system, because you have everything oriented around the customer and because you could see that entire history of communications, you could see, is this becoming a pattern? And so rather than protect and be worried about the 2% of the customers that might abuse that, they wanted to empower the team to handle the 98%. And that's really sort of allowed them to deliver a more sort of personalized service in real time to be able to do that. Okay, last sort of theme that we wanted to talk about today is around measuring what matters. And obviously, for people who have been in the contact center space for quite some time, the traditional metrics and the traditional measures of a team are largely around first contact resolution, around average handle time, or around total volume or total activity of the team, and how quickly can they resolve issues. So there's lots of traditional metrics around contact centers. But when you think about customer service as a way to sort of engage customers into the things that you measure and the things that you sort of look to within the customer service team, they start to evolve and they start to mature. Right? In this case, example of ours, Tory Birch customer, they're looking way beyond metrics around just handle time or first contact resolution. They want to start looking at what is the actual revenue and sales contribution of the customer service group, which they call client specialists. What is their contribution to revenue? Very similar to the way that they look at individual boutique stores, right? So think about Tory Birch stores in New York or San Francisco or Chicago. There's a sales number that those stores have. Thinking about the contact center as its own quote unquote store, and thinking about how do they drive revenue through that experience. So it might not be that they want to sort of turn a fast time with a customer on the phone. What's more important is engaging with that customer, delivering that personalized service, and allowing for additional sales to happen and investing in training that team to drive more sales. So those are all things that we look at as far as sort of changing the way you measure the customer service team in the contact center. Because traditionally, if you're viewed as a contact center or a cost center, ultimately what matters is driving costs down. But when you think about customer service as a relationship and a revenue center, you start to think about different metrics that I think are quite interesting as well. So this is kind of an example of that experience with Gladly and Tory, or any sort of retailer for that matter. Personalized communication, the back and forth nature of multiple communication channels, all to be oriented around customer. And that's largely what we have been working on over the last several years, and we are going to continue to work on with a number of customers in the future. And so we are excited about that opportunity and very much able to sort of answer more questions you have around that as well. So with that said, that concludes sort of the prepared material and content for today. If you have further questions that you want to ask, you maybe sort of step away after this this masterclass, feel free to reach out to me. This is Mike at mikemccarron@gladly.com, or you can reach joseph@gladly.com as well. And we are ready to take questions from the field.
So folks, remember, just go into the Q&A bucket and feel free to ask questions in there. We've got a first question here, which is how to balance proactive and personalized recommendations with customers just wanting to be helped fast, and how do you sort of balance those two things? You know, the way we've seen folks do this super well has really been a combination of thinking about both of those things, and you kind of have to staff and support both of them. We don't think it's necessarily a trade-off between them per se. It's really thinking about, hey, you start by understanding who the customer is. So for those customers, which are your high value customers, really high lifetime value, you're really investing in a higher touch level of service, in knowing that you also have to deliver more traditional, fast, rapid responses to a set of people. And it's really about tracking and measuring those two things and forecasting out what those two things look like, and staffing for both of them. I mean, they're both obviously super important, but we try to tell people that it's not really a question of sort of a conflict between the two. It's actually really about figuring out how to support both of them.
Great. Okay, so next question that just came in was around sort of a channel discussions. The question is, does Gladly have SMS, and what success have you seen with using the SMS channel? In many cases, SMS looks like transactional sort of campaigns, but what does it mean to use SMS as a customer service channel? So a couple of great examples on this. So a number of our customers are using as well as planning to use SMS as a channel. And one example that comes to mind is a great example. It was actually one of our earlier customers, retailer based out of the Northeast, that had sort of a process where if a damaged item or a damaged merchandise were to be delivered and the customer had to sort of like basically request a refund or a replacement of that product, in many ways, the process or the work that the customer would have to do to sort of document or get approval to get that repair or get that refund taken care of was kind of an arduous process. But with SMS, as well as the ability to do MMS, which is the picture sharing, what we actually had customers do is they were engaging with people via live chat. So they were doing chat back and forth. And the customer said, I have this damaged product. The customer service agent basically said, take a picture with your mobile phone and SMS text message me a picture of the damaged product to the phone number of the customer service team. And that SMS MMS picture came right into Gladly. It got blended right in with the conversation timeline that the agent was using for chat. And so immediately the chat agent was able to see the MMS picture of the damaged product in real time in the same conversation timeline. And basically that was all the documentation or proof that they needed to resolve the issue, as opposed to take a picture, attach it to an email, send it in, it's going to go through the process and it's going to have to go through the queue. It was a real-time resolution on that one. Second, yeah, so I was going to say, second example is the SMS for, yeah, go ahead, Jim.
Yeah, there's two other examples I want to share. So one macro comment around SMS is that, and this is actually interesting data we saw in the expectation survey, is that SMS is actually, of all the messaging channels, quickly becoming actually the preferred channel over what we think of as traditional web and mobile chat or even the social messaging channel. So we're seeing this like increase of SMS as a preferred channel because it's the channel that we most live in today as consumers. So we're seeing a consumer side of sort of demand. The second thing I'll say is what we're seeing often is offering up SMS as a support channel as a way to make support easier. So for example, JetBlue, if you call 1-800-JetBlue, in their IVR, they now offer the ability to move from voice to SMS. So they put it in the IVR because, you know, like they're calling in and people often, they'd rather not wait on hold. They'd rather move to an asynchronous channel like SMS, and we're seeing a really great adoption of people migrating there. And then it becomes another assisted service channel. And then another example I'll give is people putting SMS channel as a way to do self-service as well. So we have a large auto manufacturer who, you know, if you call in their IVR and you want to get the dealer locator, instead of staying on the IVR and having to enter in your zip code and then remember the address, they have the ability now to basically say, hey, I want to do a dealer locator. An SMS message gets sent with a link to their web and mobile version of the dealer locator, and then they're sort of getting people to do self-service. So not only is it becoming a channel for assisted service, it's becoming a vehicle to move people to self-service, which we think is super valuable as well.
Yeah, last comment on the SMS side I'll share is that many of our customers ask us about sort of the opt-in nature. Like obviously if you do campaigns or outbound marketing via SMS, a lot of customers aren't necessarily sort of quote unquote opting into that experience. But SMS used as a customer service channel is very, very different in that the customers prefer that channel, they want to engage in that channel, and the ability for consumers to sort of like opt in or opt out of SMS as a customer service channel is built right into Gladly. So you can use it, the customers who want to opt in to do it, it's very easy to do that. For those customers who choose not to, that's very easy for them to sort of opt out as well. One of the things that I think many companies that we talk to is they sort of bucket SMS into this all or nothing category where they say, we can't do it because of this opt-in policy. But the reality is the companies that have been successful with it are using it very effectively, and they're using it with the customers that are actually gravitating towards that channel in the first place.
Okay, a couple other questions we've got here. Raphael asked, really interesting how JetBlue's pushed the decision-making down to crew members. And the question is, how to identify whether the front line is able to handle those types of questions and issues, and how important is things like training, or is the challenge so big that might even increase the quality of the people hired, or is it both? So I'm going to let Mike take this one.
So I'll give you an example. I'll use sort of the JetBlue example, and I'll also mention sort of that auto manufacturer that Joseph mentioned earlier. In both cases, what you do and what the team has done is they've essentially put some guardrails and some boundaries in place to say, within the boundaries of this sort of like use case or scenario, you're essentially giving the team free rein to do what they think is best, but you put some upper limits or some limits around sort of like the amount of compensation that they could give or the amount of credit that they could give. And what you're essentially doing is you're allowing them to sort of do what's right by the customer, and you're limiting the risk of somebody overextending and offering too much to that particular customer. So I think training is a big part of it, which is ensure that they know where those guardrails and those boundaries are. But then once you've done that, encourage and promote and celebrate when they do it. That's one of the things we had a great sort of customer event a couple of months ago where customers were talking about this very topic, which is how do I know when we should do it, or how do I encourage the team to do it? In fact, what we found was that most customer service agents naturally wouldn't offer the customer that credit or wouldn't offer it. And what they're realizing is that they're afraid, that they've been conditioned to not offer those kinds of things for customers. And what both JetBlue as well as the auto manufacturer that we work with did, and then another retailer in the sort of e-commerce space, is that when a customer service agent sort of did that sort of like empowerment effort, they would celebrate it, they would promote it, they would tell the team, do more of this because this actually matters to our customers. So that's a great example of, yes, you should do more training, but you should also put the boundaries in and encourage the team to do what they can. So last question I think we may have time for, maybe one more after this if there's one more, is how do you think about automation and artificial intelligence in the context of high-touched personalized service? So maybe I'll start and then I'll let Joseph sort of take a crack at this one too. I think that, automation and AI is absolutely an interesting sort of space where you want to automate and you want to sort of allow for customers to do the self-service efforts that they can on some of the most sort of routine, low-level questions that get asked, order status or shipping policy or finding a location of the nearest store. Like, obviously, like those kinds of questions, those don't require, nor do you want to be spending sort of your human sort of resources in your teams on fielding those questions via chat or email or phone. Like, if you can sort of allow for people to self-service or navigate down a path of getting the answer that they need, like that's a great way to invest in sort of artificial intelligence or automation or AI. I think where it becomes challenging is when when customers have tried to let the sort of the bot-like experience take over from talking to a person, and it gets into this situation where the customer wants to engage and talk to somebody, but the bot doesn't let them do that, or the AI doesn't let them do that. And that, I think, is not the direction that we're seeing customers have success with, which is automate the things that make sense, but allow for customers to quickly connect with a live person for those areas that matter most to them.
I think the way we think about this is we want to really avoid the thing that occurred with IVRs, which is that, today everyone sort of put all these things in IVRs to try to make it so that you wouldn't talk to a person, and it's super frustrating for customers. I think we've all been trained to just, hit zero, ask for operator, etc. We really want to avoid that type of experience. So the investments that we're making are really in two areas. One, how do you invest in machine learning and AI to help make the individual agent more productive? So for example, inside of Gladly, we've got a knowledge base called Answers. Those answers are content to help answer questions, reference material, etc. And we've applied machine learning and AI to categorize all the content that comes in from customers in real time, suggest responses and answers that the customer service agents can use. And that drives a ton of efficiency. That's a great example where you can use it, you're driving efficiency, you're suggesting content to the team members. And the great thing about it is if we're right 60 or 70% of the time, the customer service agents are really excited because we've helped make their life a lot easier. Where if you compare that to the experience for a consumer, if you're only right 60 to 70% of the time, you're wrong 30% of the time, it's not a great experience. We're really investing a lot in the agent side of the productivity. And it's also in things like topic categorization, like all these things you ask your teams to do that computers are really good at. We've invested a ton in machine learning to automate that work. So automate the stuff that's more routine. And then the same thing is trying to do that with customers as well, which is for self-service and help, like to suggest, hey, might you be asking about this, and offer that up to them. but always connect that automation back to the customer so that when there is a conversation with a person, all of that history is part of their history in Gladly, for example. So you can see that, hey, they asked these sets of questions, we tried to answer them this way, and now they're actually talking to you. You know, you're not actually going and repeating the same answers that maybe the machine learning system actually offered to them. We really believe that you want to connect those two experiences in one view of who that customer is. Okay, I think we only have 1 minute left. I don't know if there's any last questions. Hopefully this was useful as sort of a little appetizer to sort of think about how to transform customer service to really be much more focused on marketing, and some of the key themes about making it about people, thinking about making investments in how you do proactive communications with folks, really thinking about helping customers help themselves, the importance of empowering your team, your agents, your crew members, or specialists, and ultimately about measuring the thing that you want to change, which is how do you drive top revenue. We think focusing on those key things is sort of the first steps in that journey towards reinventing service to be much more about marketing.
Great. If there's any other follow-on questions that you all have, feel free to reach out to both Mike and Joseph here. And we thank everybody for your time today, and have a great rest of your day.